The geopolitical fallout from Russia's invasion of Ukraine may result in 2 new NATO members soon. Both the Swedish and Finnish governments have indicated they're considering abandoning decades of military independence and neutrality in favor of the security guarantees offered by NATO. Earlier this week, Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin confirmed that talks to join the alliance were sparked directly by the war in Ukraine. Let's watch.
The European security architecture have changed fundamentally after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The change in the security landscape makes it necessary to analyze how we best secure peace for Finland and in our region in the future. We have in the last years intensified our defense cooperation. Therefore, it is important that we have a constant dialogue between our countries. Both Finland and Sweden make independently their decisions regarding security policy arrangements. But we do that with a clear understanding that our choices will affect not only ourselves, but our neighbors as well.
Joining us now to walk us through what could be a major restructuring of the power in Europe is retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. He's a senior fellow at military expert Defense Priorities. Welcome back to the show. I'm alarmed by this. I think this is not a good move. What do you? I don't feel like any real threat to Sweden or Finland. Why would they be wanting to fan the flames, it seems like, at this point by doing something such as this, since we know that one of the main reasons for the invasion in Ukraine was the discussion of NATO expansion? Tell us, is this a wise idea for Finland and Sweden to be indicating that they might be joining NATO?
Well, look, I certainly understand it on one level because it's an emotional response and understandable fear that you see a country on your border that is showing some aggressive moves and has been willing to cross border to go into another country that and is engaged in full-on war. So on the one level, I certainly understand that. But on a practical level, we have to understand that nothing is done in a vacuum. And for Finland and Sweden to be added to NATO adds a burden to the entire alliance, and it adds yet another level of potential risk for the United States. So before anybody does anything, I think we need to take a long, hard look at this. We cannot rush this through and make a decision on emotion because people so much, hate Russia, understandably so, but in many quarters. But we have to do what makes sense for American national security. And one of the aspects of this would be necessary first is to demonstrate, someone has to be able to show us how NATO would militarily defend against an attack into Finland. And of course, you have this large border with Russia, which would be adding to their fear. And of course, you've probably seen that Moscow's reaction has been understandable and predictable, that they would move forces more toward that area, that they would accelerate their nuclear posture toward both the Finns and the Swedes. And, none of those things are good for security. And it does nothing to lower the tensions. It only does things to heighten the tensions, because, as you just said, that was one of the reasons why Russia claims that they attacked into Ukraine.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel, Finland didn't start sharing a border with Russia yesterday. NATO emerged post-Cold War as a post-Cold War defense treaty. The idea was not that it was going to get bigger, if anything, that it was going to get smaller post-Soviet Union ceased to exist. Why do you think strategically now we're having these conversations? I hear you saying that there's kind of an emotional resonance here, a kind of emotional understanding for why they would be concerned. But we were given a lot of very kind of like psychosomatic reasons for the invasion before there was a more fulsome conversation about NATO expansion as precipitating some of these events. Do you think there are other strategic factors going on? Is this a game of chicken that the West is playing, saying, hey, you don't want NATO expansion, I'll give you NATO expansion? What do you think is going on here?
I'm sure that actually has an element of it in that many are saying, oh, okay, so you said NATO expansion wasn't this, then yeah, how about these two big ones here? And of course, there's still talk about potentially later on Ukraine joining NATO, which I think is entirely unhelpful and definitely not necessary or useful. Look, we have to understand also a fundamental reality and truth here. And NATO expansion, by the very declaration of NATO itself, can only be done if it improves the security of the entire alliance. Adding these two countries will not improve it. It will add burden to the remainder of them. But here's another really fundamental problem with all this that needs to be openly discussed out in the open, is that the Russians have shown that their tactical conventional capacity is far less than anybody thought. Ukraine has now caused extraordinary levels of damage to their ground forces, and it will be a decade or more before they even get back to where they were before 24 February, meaning that Russia is no threat to attack a single NATO country, much less to go into multiple ones, as some are hysterically claiming. There's no truth to that. There's no reality based on it when you look at the fundamentals. So there is no need to expand NATO. It is unfortunately primarily an emotional move right now. We just have to be honest and admit that.
Yeah, I mean, Sweden joining NATO, I don't think would really cause much. I mean, that's no different, I think, than, Germany or any of these other countries. I mean, they're not right up on Russia's border. But Finland, on the other hand, Helsinki to Moscow is about the same distance as Kiev to Moscow. And then you got St. Petersburg right there on the border of Finland. So, of course, Russia would have security concerns that I believe would be very legitimate. At the same time, obviously, Finland has their own security concerns. But where do you think this is really? Is this sort of the I don't know, military industrial complex saying, well, if we can't have Ukraine, then we need to swap it out for Finland, and we need to get more bases up on the Finnish border? I mean, what do you think is really truly driving this?
Well, I hope that's not the case, because that would be pretty bad if it was. You can't rule it out. I don't have any personal evidence to see that. But what I do think is there's a lot of is that there's this move to punish Russia everywhere you can, whether it's through sanctions, whether it's sending weapons and other help into Ukraine, or expanding NATO. And I think a lot of people are backing anything that Russia doesn't like, and they definitely don't like this one. And so I think it's just based on a punitive intent. But we have to be sober and straight about this and understand we got to think long term. We can't just think what's going on right now. This does not help us long term, and we should definitely not fast track this, because it won't. I don't believe it will work out to our advantage, and we need to make sure that we do what makes sense.
In an ideal world, what would you script the Biden administration's response as being? Should they be coming out saying, we are not looking to expand NATO at this time as a way to de-escalate tensions with Russia? And how likely it is, do you think we're going to get that kind of a response?
If I was in the White House, I would be advocating that we say, okay, we're going to take these requests seriously, because I do completely understand the concerns of the Finns, especially because of their locality and closeness to the border, and the fact that they've got a bad history with Soviet Union and Russia in the past. And I do get that. Let's just say, let's take our time. Let's do this methodically. Let's take some time and think about these and do studies and that kind of thing, just kind of to slow down the train for the moment. But the bottom line is that I just think that once we do that, we can show that it's not in America's interest. It's not in NATO's interest, and it's ultimately not in Finland's interest. But in terms of what I expect to see, I'm just not sure. President Biden has kind of stood firm on a number of things, against lots of popular opinion, and I applaud him for that. And other things that with the pressure gets too great, sometimes he goes in other directions, and it frankly remains to be seen how this goes.
Well, I appreciate your insight on this, Lieutenant Colonel. Thank you for joining us.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Tomorrow on Rising, our Rising panel will join us to weigh in on the biggest news of the day. And don't forget, Rising Fridays kick off this week. Join Ryan Grimm and Emily Jashinsky. They'll take a look back at the week and preview what's to come.
So be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. So be sure to check that out. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow. Hopefully Robbie's feeling better. I know I had to jump in a bit early for him this morning. So
you're
hopefully
hero,
he feels
Kim.
better. Yes, I don't want to show up really early tomorrow morning. So Robbie better get back on the train and feeling better by tomorrow. That's what I know.
Sending positive energy out into the universe.
Yes.
See you
All
tomorrow.
Right, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.